Good evening, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you for coming. My name is Jean Lucasey, and I'm the school board president this year. On behalf of the board, I want to welcome all of you to the Dobbs Ferry School District's first ever community forum. Why a forum? Well, last year when the board was searching for a new superintendent to succeed Dr. Lisa Brady, we made a commitment to the community to offer opportunities for interaction with the new superintendent. And when we discussed it with Mr. Slentz, he proposed the forum idea. So here we are. And yes, the forum will include plenty of time for questions and answers. I want to let you know that it's been great getting to know Ken these past 5.5 months, and a real education working with him to bring tried and true processes into the district in further service of teaching and learning. In the process, he has thoughtfully energized the board in a new model for policy making, and our policies are carefully driving everything we do in this district. As this is not a board meeting, but rather an opportunity for the community to find out what's on Mr. Slentz's mind and for him to take a closer look at what's important to the community, it's my pleasure to hand the floor over to our new superintendent, Mr. Ken Slentz. Thank you, and take it away, Ken.
Thank you very much, Jean. It always makes me nervous when people clap before I start talking because it's a management of expectations. Now I worry that I'm going to disappoint you. But we'll move on from that. Thank you all so much for taking the time. You know, it's amazing how busy people are these days, and that you're willing to come out and listen and have a conversation, and ourselves as a community focus on teaching and learning to, with, and from one another. This is great to see, so thank you. Kevin Ridley, Terrence Hyder, a number of people behind the scenes help put these types of things together, so it looks fairly seamless, but the number of tests that are going on, talking with facilities to bring the temperature to a more comfortable level, there's a lot going on there. Jean, as president, is but one of a number of board members who are here tonight, so thanks to all of you for coming out. I know how much you all get paid for these late nights, so double thanks for that. A number of our administrative team is here as well, another late night for all of you, so thank you for being here. So I wanted to start, I want to give you a little bit of an introduction to me. If I say 54 years worth, trust me, I'm not going to take you through a slideshow of my 54 years. I'll just give you the highlights of what landed me here. I'm an upstate kid. And let me define that, because there's some mixed definitions down here in terms of what upstate means. I grew up in Watertown, New York. If you are not sure where that is, think Canada and drive 30 miles south. It gives you an idea. In 1977, when I was in grade school, we had a storm, and the National Weather Service, I lived on a farm at that time, the National Weather Service flew in to measure the snow on the highest point on our property, 52 feet of snow. So it was a little different than down here than when I get the weather alerts and I look outside and I don't understand. I'm still confused on that. But from being an upstate kid and really wandering the larger upstate area as defined by Albany West and North, I went to college, 5 different SUNY schools. I started as a community college kid because I wasn't quite sure. I came out of high school thinking I was supposed to know what I wanted to do. And so I became a landscape architect major at SUNY Cobleskill. And as so many of us do, at any level, I was inspired by a teacher who said, no, 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 do that as a hobby. Let's get into economics, let's get into policy, right? And so Fred Kowal just had such an influence, still does to this day, by the way, on my life. Off to Geneseo after that, went to SUNY Albany, thinking that I wanted to be in academics. I was in a program for political science there until I realized it's a great field for studying itself. I wasn't really sure the contributions that I could make to larger society. So my father at that point was counting the number of years that I had been in college and was making some not so subtle hints that maybe it's time to stop going to college and do something different. And that's when I discovered middle school children. I had the pleasure of working at St. Catherine's Center for Children, which is a private school for students with emotional disabilities in Albany. And one weekend, I fell in love with that age group. Special education became a passion for me, and it just drove what I knew I wanted to do. Off to Oswego to get my teaching certification, and the rest has become some interesting history, but included, as my father noted, more college to get the various degrees. Ended with time at SUNY Plattsburgh, and I would turn around many years later and teach curriculum courses there to graduate students as well. So all of this, different life experiences, I've traveled that, and I went into teaching, and this is now my 5th district in 20 plus years as a superintendent or a policymaker at the state level, has really formed a number of things for me. First, as I said, I have a true passion for teaching and learning. And a lot of that stems, firstly, from my experience with special education students. As a high school student, I spent a lot of time at a place called Pathfinder Village. At the time, it was the only place in the world that was dedicated just to Down syndrome children and adults. And it was an amazing experience. My mom was a teaching assistant. I helped out with the Special Olympics basketball team, and just it furthered my passion. And then as I would go on later in my career, I discovered the gateway drug to the addiction of knowledge, and it's reading, right? We are in the knowledge age. We're in the information age. How many of our kids can't access it around the state and around the country because they can't read well? That drives me literally every day in terms of the work that we do. The board hears it. My team hears it a little bit ad nauseum. Apologies. But this is what we do. Let's talk about some observations from there. In 5.5 months, as Jean noted, there's some things that really have stood out for me. And it's interesting because some of you may know that Westchester has a bit of a stereotype to it, right? Upstate people have stereotypes for Westchester, just like Westchester has stereotypes for upstate. It's a little bit fascinating from a sociological perspective, quite honestly. But my goodness, whether it's individual parents, individual groups stalking me on the sports field, in the community as I'm able to get out and about, this has really been striking. The staff, the board, obviously, our administrative team. The first time that we got together, literally days after I arrived, I'm going to preface this because some of them might get nervous that I'm about to tell some tales. We closed the door in our administrative retreat, and we had a conversation. And the honesty and the candor that came out of that was really striking and refreshing. This was a team that was ready to work, and they were ready to work on teaching and learning and getting our focus on that after a very long 2.5 years of the pandemic and everything that came with that. So this was remarkable. And what came out as part of this was a real sense of pride in a number of areas in the history of the community. And we'll talk about changes in a few moments. But the pride in the history, the pride in this school, in this district, the pride in our kids and what they've accomplished over the years, and so many graduates have come back. And that's really oftentimes such a testament to the community. Of course we want our kids to graduate and go experience the career world, college world, the military, whatever the choice of pathway is, but then they have the choice to come home, right? They didn't not leave, they chose to come back. And boy, that says something about a community. Because how many of us as kids said something like, I can't wait to get out of here, I'll never come back, right? But then you do, it's like, what brought you back? And oftentimes the answer is pretty typical, right? It's the people, it's what the community is. And so the pride piece really has shown up in so many ways. You know, in conversations with so many groups, and this combination right here, the welcoming and the pride, the partnerships that the district has with our PD, with the fire department, with all of our first responders, our PTSA, the Education Foundation. My goodness, the work that goes on behind the scenes from so many of these groups is astounding. And again, further affirmation to me that my wife and I made the right choice in coming down to Westchester. This is the big one. The board had to be willing to make some trust falls, if you will, on some of the things that we were proposing. The administrative team has had to do that. Our staff has had to do that. In really demonstrating, there's a lot of vulnerability here, right? Because part of this says you have to be comfortable saying, I don't know, or I'm not sure, or I'd love to learn more, because there's this really interesting phenomena in education where you achieve, after so many years, a level of expertise and you're comfortable with it. And then along comes a big change. And you go through this metamorphosis where all of a sudden you have to go back to being a novice learner, and my goodness, that's uncomfortable. And you become really vulnerable because you're not the expert anymore. But this group that I'm working with, my goodness, they're willing to do that. They're willing to trust the processes that we're building, the knowledge that we're building, to give me the knowledge, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, about how the district came to be, how we got to where we are. And it really is just such a treat to work within this culture and climate. The desire to understand. A lot of parents that I've met with want to understand why we're doing certain things, why certain changes have been made, why certain policies are being made, and we've had some really good and rich discussions around this. And what I really appreciate most about this is that desire to understand. We're not coming in as we got a little bit prone to do, quite honestly, during the pandemic, and that was being reflexive and reactive. Right? We lost a little bit of civility during that time because there was so much going on, because so many of us had to become novices in so many ways again. We didn't know how to navigate, and so that brought short tempers oftentimes. The civil discussions have been just, again, more contribution to the positiveness of the experience. And this is hard, right? When you talk about a community that really is rooted in a tradition, and there have been a number of things that have disturbed those traditions, that have changed those traditions in a relatively short amount of time. This is difficult, right? It's difficult for the staff when you've had a superintendent and this stalwart of a superintendent who, my goodness, the woman could command an audience. And with the team just built so many structures that I'm fortunate to just continue the building off of, right? The foundation was solid. You can't do some of the things we're doing without a good, solid foundation. But now we have all these changes. We have a ton of new staff. You have, new board members. So many things are changing. This is hard and it's really tiring, right? But people are still willing to go about the work. But here's what is really great about it with the conversations, and this goes to our first area of focus, teaching and learning. It sounds obvious, but if you get into a room of 50 people, and I asked each of you to write on your card, what is the purpose of school? You're going to get a lot of different answers. And how do I know that? Because I've done it in 5 different districts, 10 different graduate classes, et cetera, et cetera. We think we all have a common notion of this, but at the end of the day, this is why we're here, right? Now, I'm not just talking about teaching and learning in the classroom. Teaching and learning takes place all over our campuses, from the playground to the athletic field to the stage. Having the best possible people to lead that learning, to lead that teaching, the training that we put in place to keep the focus there, the willingness to say no to certain things that otherwise might be great, but it distracts from our focus on this, because we have one common enemy in school districts. Some of you have heard me say this before, and it's not money or lack of, it's time, right? I started out by saying everyone is crazy busy these days, and what do we all wish we had more of? It's time. That means choices have to be made. Some of you chose to come here tonight, where you could be home, watching a number of different programs, listening to a podcast, doing nothing. All of those were options, but you made a choice. We make choices every day to say no to certain things in our schools and yes to others, because we're not saying that that's, that one thing or maybe what we used to do isn't good. We're saying that in a limited amount of time, we found a way to do it better, which means our kids have better opportunities. Our kids can have greater outcomes to ultimately build off of that foundation I talked about, right? That's what we're talking about here. To move themselves forward, to move us as a community forward in very interesting times. School culture and climate. There's a lot of misunderstanding around this, so I'll just summarize it like this. If we're going to stay focused on teaching and learning, a good part of our job is removing obstacles, right? For the board and myself, our job is to remove obstacles for the administrators so they can move programs forward. Their job is to remove obstacles for teachers so they can do their best work. The teacher's job is to remove obstacles for the students so they can take greatest advantage of the learning opportunities that we have. All of this works hand in hand. But if our kids don't feel safe in school, and by safe, I don't just mean that they know the doors are locked, right? They know they're not going to be bullied because maybe they have a different culture. Maybe they have a different skin color. Maybe they have a different belief, right? Are we a school district that says, you're welcome here? We love the fact that you bring that difference to us, and we're going to take advantage of it. We're going to exploit that difference so we can all learn, right? That's the work, right? So as we're doing this, all of this is guided through the goals and the strategic planning. If we're going to make the best choices in a limited amount of time, limited resources, to give our kids the best opportunity to be able to read first, right? That's the access. And then to experience all of these other opportunities that this community has so generously supported. This is a very different structure than what some of you were in 3-4 years ago, right? Because of the investments that you made. The goals and the strategic planning, this sounds a little bit businessy, but our job is to make sure that you're getting a return on that investment. And so we have to plan for that. Sometimes we forget that school districts are really significant organizations. We are a $53 million organization. And so if we're not strategically planning in thoughtful ways, if we're not building policies in thoughtful ways that guide our work, then we're not giving you that return. And we feel from a stewardship perspective, that's our obligation to you. We have a contract, if you will, with this community to deliver. The long-range planning. This takes a lot of humility because you have to understand that you're building this plan for a time when you as the employee may not be here. But as we're doing this, as we're going about the strategic planning, as we're setting goals, as we're building our long-range plans, this means that now as we do that, people are less focused on pulling all of this together and figuring out the protocols and figuring out how we're supposed to do something so they can focus on the teaching and learning. Right? There's method to the madness around this. And so what do we do in order to really effectuate that? Systems, right? Because we want two things in our work, not just in school districts. And I think all of us would agree. We want predictability, we want consistency. If I have those two things, I can get a whole lot more work done. I can fulfill more of that contract that we have with the community, and our parents in particular, on behalf of their kids. If we don't have the systems and we have to try to figure out things each time we go into a situation, that's just gross inefficiency. So we're spending a lot of time building systems and structures and protocols. And this goes back to one of the things that has struck me most. Just the humility to say that, you know what? There are some things that we do well. There are some things that we do exceedingly well. But let's be honest and talk about the things that maybe we're not so good at that. Let's talk about that. Let's look at the evidence, the research, to find out how can we do it better. And maybe it means some retraining on behalf of the adults, regardless of our level of experience and that expertise that I talked about. It's the willingness to trek back, to be that novice learner again, as unstable, as unsteady, and unsettling as that can be. This is the commitment we're making. We're going to get better at getting better by providing that support, by providing a safe space for the adults to say, I don't know, but I want to learn more, because I know I can do better for my kids in areas X, Y, or Z. The board, as Jean rightly said, we spend a lot of time in policy work. And what's the importance of policy? It's the game plan, right? If you don't have policy to guide your work, you risk those two things that I talked about, predictability and consistency. Right? We have a code of conduct that governs the behavior for students and adults, by the way. We have investment policies, right? If you look at our policy manual, for some of you it's great nighttime reading because it'll put you to sleep like that. For others of us, it's super geeky stuff that we just love to do, right? You know, the budget, arguably, is a district's most important policy. As we were meeting with the finance team last night and having a fairly nerdy discussion about money, we talked about that. If you want to know what a community and a school district values, you don't have to go into the schools. You don't have to read their policies. Look at their budget. You get a pretty good indication of what they value. Right? What are they investing in fulfillment of the contract to the community? It's usually pretty straightforward. And there's an opposite question. What are they not investing in that they should be? These are the questions that we're asking within the larger team. And all of this, why? Simple answer, right? Very simple answer. Best possible opportunities for our kids. And there's a second part of this formula when we're building the budget. Best possible program for the children within the confines of the taxpaying community. We are the stewards of your tax dollars. We have to make sure that we're investing it smartly to give our kids those best opportunities. It goes to that contract piece that we have with you, right? So in all of this work, and there's a lot of it going on, and if you are able to get on the website, and perhaps some of you have, and you've seen the 10 goals that we've laid out. Now, those of you who are in business, you shudder at the idea of 10 goals because it's a terrible idea, right? The likelihood for failure is high. But this was something that we said, look, there are some of these goals that we know we can achieve in a relatively short period of time. There are other goals that are going to take a little bit longer. There's a couple of goals, quite frankly, that are aspirational. These are the things that we want to realize. But we did it this way because we made a very intentional decision to use this year's goals as our team is forming and we're figuring out some of these investment strategies and how we're going to do this work. This is going to be the bridge to our next strategic plan. Some of you may be aware with our the larger strategic plan, it ends at the end of this year. So instead of taking the time in the very novice space that we're in terms of working together, let's have those goals act as that bridge. What are the things that are really the most important for us to do? And so those 10 goals are outlined. The rationale is there as well to take a look at. But within that, it's a fair question to say, but wait a minute, I don't see the thing that's important to me as a family. The goals are kind of like the spotlights up here, right? Doesn't mean that the house lights aren't burning. Doesn't mean we don't have lamps on. The metaphor being that there's a whole lot of other work going on. And as we have gone through the analysis of our goals, and for each of them we have this very obnoxiously large 11 by 17 document. It's a goals tracker document. We have teams for each goal. And so we've gone through now 9 out of the 10 of those goal teams, and we do this exercise 3 times throughout the year to find out how are we doing with the strategies that we're putting in place. Let's be mindful of the outcomes that we're seeking for each of the goals so that the board can then see the trust that they're putting in myself and our administrative team. That work is moving forward. And it is going to be a nice bridge into that next strategic plan where we'll pull a community-based strategic planning team together again when we get to that point. But all of this is building cohesion. And even if you look at the committee website on the web page on our website, you'll see, again, we're being very intentional about how all of the board's committees are working together to achieve the things that we've talked about tonight. So there's a tremendous amount of work going on. When we came back from Christmas, from the holiday break, looking at my team, I couldn't help but say to them, and I'm sure I offended some of them, you guys look terrible. You look so tired. This is the hard work. It's what hard work does, right? It makes you tired. And so we're constantly looking at the work that we're doing and making those decisions. Is there something that we can do that's better? It's the idea of why we're here tonight. Let's try something different. Let's bring the community together so they can hear at a high level what's going on with us, and we can hear some of the questions about this work that we're doing as a district. What do we see in the future? Maybe what does the budget look like this year? We're just starting to get more hard numbers in on that. So Dr. Klamser is leading our work on building the budget in such a way that, again, that policy, that value-laden policy, we can work with the board to make sure we are giving our kids the best possible programs within the design that we have. So all of this comes back to building knowledge, and I don't just mean in the classroom, I mean for all of us. I need to improve my knowledge of the community. I look forward to spending more time in and around the community so I have a greater depth of understanding of what's important, of working with our team, with our faculty and staff to figure out where are the areas of support of greatest need to make sure that, again, we're removing those obstacles so that our kids feel like they are, in fact, getting a great education, regardless of where it happens. And so as we're doing some of these things, we're taking a look maybe at some of the opportunities that we're missing. The high school ran a really interesting exercise earlier in the year. They surveyed all the kids to find out, outside of the mandatory part of school, what are you involved in? And for the kids that didn't have an activity or athletics, by the way, there's very few of them. You know, we have great participation here, which is such a good thing to see. They were able to target those kids, have interviews with them, and find out. So they learned a whole lot more about those kids, and to make that connection with our kids to find out, maybe the child's working. Maybe they have daycare that they have to provide childcare after hours. There could be 100 reasons. Or maybe they just didn't feel like they were invited into the show, if you will. This is happening in every program and in every building. And this is why I'm suggesting they're really tired, because they're doing remarkable work. I have to believe that board members are tired because we spend a lot of time in committee meetings. They have to do a lot of reading in between meetings about how we are collectively moving this work forward and trying to find those best solutions within that limited time that we have. So we'll keep building knowledge. The communications piece. You know, there's something really interesting about communications, and it's assuming that you did it, right? Well, I told my kid to clean his room. We all know how that movie ends, right? Back in the day, how many of us had teachers who said, I taught them, they didn't learn it, not my problem. What a luxury, what a luxury. Our job is to make sure that when we communicate, we're communicating well, that we are hitting every corner of the community. We're not sure if we do that. So we've had conversations, again, in another one of the board committees. Maybe it's time to bring in someone who studies communication in school districts and kind of pressure tests it. Talk to the community, do some surveys, find out, not just do you like what we're doing with our current communication, but are there other areas that we could think about? Again, this was one of them. The video messages that we occasionally send out, trying to find the best possible ways to get that information out without, P.S., overwhelming you. Those of you who have students in the high school, in the middle school, in the elementary school, you get quite a bit of information coming, right? So as a team, we talked about that, look, can we be a little more parent-friendly Can we streamline this so that elementary, you have a dedicated day that you're going to send, so parents start to have some predictability, right? That we're more consistent. Middle and high school doing the same thing, making sure that as we're communicating as a district, we're not creating conflict there. We're better, but we're not there yet. There's still some work that we can do. So lots of opportunities to get better at communicating. The 23-24 budget. This is really interesting coming out of COVID, how this process is different necessarily than pre-COVID, right? We're spending a lot of time talking about student support services. Our kids came through and out of the pandemic, and many of them are different, right? Not being in school, not having that consistency of school. You'll notice a theme here, right? They have greater levels of support. That goes back to the whole notion that we have to make investments that are getting rid of the obstacles that a number of our kids have from teaching and learning. How do we do that? Is it additional counseling staff? Is it a program like Primary Project that we anticipate bringing into the elementary, where kids who are just struggling to adjust to school, they don't have special needs, they don't really need full-time counseling, but they need something. And so the school adjustment program that is all based on play therapy is really quite remarkable. And so we've spent a lot of time, Dr. Drake and her team, looking at that to see if that's something that we think would advantage our kids, and we believe that it will. So we've had conversations with the board about that. Making sure that, again, those areas of programming for our students with special needs, that we are building out what's called the continuum of services, that we offer as many possible programs here where our children can be educated with their peers instead of having to rely on sending students out. Right? That's something that's very important to us. We're limited because of the size of the district, but we think that we can do better on that. So you'll see that coming in. Again, all of this, there's so many areas that the principals and the program area directors and coordinators are coming to us with these ideas on how we can best form this important policy to move all of this work forward. This has been a great process so far. And you'll hear a lot more about that. For example, combining bullets 2 and 3, by the end of the week, we anticipate sending out the first in a communication series around the budget. We're developing these one-pagers, and the first one is on the district's fiscal health. You know, it's hard to know other than just saying, well, we trust the board and the administration to run things. We're going to give you some hard data that says, we're telling you that we're in good fiscal health, and here's how we know it. Here's the report that was generated by the comptroller's office. Here's all of the audits that we face, all external to us, that say, you all are doing a good job. The board, Dr. Brady, Dr. Clamser, what they put together over the last several years was strength in your fiscal position, and that's something you can certainly be proud of. As I talked about measuring the progress towards goals, how are we doing on what we have said is the most important work of the district? Again, how many of us have been in organizations where you set goals or you set a strategic plan, and at the end of the year when it's time to evaluate it, the first step is to remove the dust, right? Because you haven't really paid attention to it during the year. We live off of this, right? This is what drives our work. It's what gives us permission to say no to other things, because this is our focus. These are the investment points that we think are going to be best for our kids and our families within the community. Same reason, right? This is what it comes down to. And this is a lot of the conversation that I've had with many of you individually and with some of you as small groups. What does this look like? There's some differences of opinion on this. And my goodness, what a great thing to have, right? That diversity of thought. Here's what's important. Why can't we do this? Let's have the conversation. Sometimes there's very good reasons why we can't do things. Sometimes we've looked at it, and based on that time and that opportunity cost, we've said, you know what? It's good. It would be great if we had more time, but we have to prioritize this because this gives more students more opportunities for better outcomes. But these are really important and valuable and helpful conversations. So That's the 10,000 foot view after 5.5 months. And one of the things that I should have shared in observations, other than this interesting, upstate conversation and what constitutes weather, as I was driving into work today, I'm a little fascinated, maybe a little scared of artificial intelligence. And, Waze demonstrated a grasp of the obvious because, my goodness, every 5 minutes, pothole reported ahead. We're in Westchester County. Can we just stipulate to the potholes and move on, right? It's really quite an experience driving down the Taconic every day and coming across the sawmill. Some of you will remember playing Frogger as kids. I joke with my wife that, yeah, Frogger went well. 29 minutes of Frogger this morning, right? And then you get the occasional, cell phone checker and you have no room to play on the outside, so it's fascinating. But that has been an observation as well. So for the question and answer, just some guidelines for this. I'll ask people to come up to the microphone, calling out from your seat. Some of us don't hear well, and so it's helpful to have the microphone. I'll ask you to come up in line for those of you who are brave to do so. Certainly ask the question. But on the questions, if it's something that's really specific to you, I would ask that you hold off until afterwards and have a conversation with me. And I'll either try to help you get that question answered, or I may direct you to one of my teammates. There are questions that I will answer in one of three ways. I will answer it immediately if I am fully confident in the answer. 5.5 months in, my confidence is growing, but I'm not there on all topics yet. Tomorrow, if it's something that I know one of my teammates is really smart about, or a board member is really smart about, and I want to get the best answer, and we'll get back to you. Some of them are going to be later because, that's interesting. I don't want to give you an answer yet because I want to give it depth of thought, and I want to respect the question by giving you a thoughtful answer. And I find invariably in any of these that I've done, there's a good number of those, which, as I suggested on other things, is really quite helpful. Okay? So with that said, let me hear what you're thinking, what you think the state of the district is, or questions that you have about our operation. And again, just a guideline. We're scheduled to end at 8:30. I like to start meetings on time. I like to end on time out of respect for your very busy schedule. Any of you that want to stay afterwards, this drives my wife nuts when she occasionally comes with me to these things. I will stay until the last question is asked. Okay, that's part of the contract that I have with all of you. Right? Questions? And by the way, thank you all very much for the attention during that time. I appreciate that. And I do not do cold calling, so if there are no questions, then. Oh, Terrence is going to turn that on for you.
Thank you for providing this forum, and I hope we have many more. Just philosophical, because obviously you're going to come upon, like you said, diverse thought, competing priorities. Kind of give us just a quick highlight, if you can, tonight, best practices in evaluating competing demands on a district.
Yeah, so the first piece, and this first part is a god-awful answer, but it's just how we function. There is a hierarchy of organizations within public education, federal government, state government. Oftentimes, community government, local government has influence on this. So first, we have to make sure that we're complying with whatever the appropriate law or regulation is. The second, though, really goes to what I was talking about before. Does that area, does that suggestion, that idea, that initiative, that thing that maybe we've done for 20 years, does that provide the best opportunities for the most number of children? We're a small district. Sometimes it's hard, to have a crew team, for example. Probably can't pull that off in Dobbs Ferry. A bowling team, however, this year, typically, for example, we've had 3 or 4 kids be interested in bowling. 17 this year. We have an opportunity to give 17 kids a lifelong sport hosted by our community. Why not? Certain courses, Dr. Foligno and his student legislative group, they're looking at courses that we can provide. And some of them are great courses for a high school to offer. Psychology, for example, which we've had here. They're having good conversations. Is it time to bring that back? Well, how many students do we think that we could get? If it's 1 or 2, and we're going to pay a teacher to have that, that doesn't give us that investment that we want. So again, compliance first, opportunities for students second, but then that third category, is this something that this could actually build to something bigger? Maybe we have to go to the board to say, this is going to be a pilot exercise, but based on our experience as an administrative team, we have confidence that by year 2, that would grow more. By year 3, it would grow even more. And so we'll have that level of conversation. Does that help? Okay. Hey, Ellie.
Hi, Ken. Nice to see you.
You as well.
Thanks so much for doing this, opening yourself up to questions from the community and sharing how it's going so far. I really appreciated the way you framed school culture and climate as a responsibility to remove obstacles to learning for our children and for our community. And, you know, as we all know, there's a lot going on in our schools that has become politicized, and more so every day. Yeah. And, you know, when I think about making sure that our kids are safe enough at school to learn, you know, I think about those groups who are most vulnerable and who have the most obstacles to overcome in order to be able to learn, right? Whether that's race, religion, language, immigration status, LGBTQI, and you know, I know, you know, Dobbs Ferry sees the district sees its goal as to create global learners and thinkers and leaders, and part of that is a commitment to diversity of thought and to welcoming all members of our community equally. And so I wonder about a couple of things that have been in the news and have been on my mind because of that, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. The first is right now, today, the headlines about the College Board changing the curriculum for AP African American Studies. And I know we don't have AP courses. It's not specifically relevant.
We actually have a couple. Okay.
Well, I'm not in high school, you know, don't have kids in high school yet. Good to know. Do we have that one?
We do not.
Okay. I want to know your take on how you can protect the kind of teaching and learning that we believe is important for our students from outside political influences. Yeah. And then sort of the second part to that is there was a both fascinating and horrifying article in the New York Times a week or two ago about the quandary that school districts have found themselves in across the country with revealing gender transitions, new names and pronouns to parents when children have said they don't feel safe having that discussion with their parents or having that discussed with their parents. And so I don't believe we have a policy on that. I know there's guidance from the State Department of Education, but I can't seem to find within their guidance anything specifically about that. And so that's a more specific question. Mm-hmm. Do we have a policy? If so, what is it? If not, can we work on one? And also a broader question speaking to the inclusive and safe environment for all students.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the questions. I'll see if I can pick those apart. The politics, like I've been in education since the early 1990s. I've been an administrator for, as I suggested, 20 years, over 20 years. I've worked on state policy. One of the pride points for me was sitting in Assemblyman Danny O'Connell's office and moving the DASA law forward. It had been hung up over cost. There was a projected cost to implement it. If I remember right, it was going to be $254 million. And I said to the assemblyman, if you can give us $270,000, Commissioner and I can make it work. I think it was like a month later. the law went forward, because that was so important for the sanctity of public education, to make sure that our kids felt welcomed, right? That they were protected, that the adults in the building felt welcome and again, safe, as we talked about before. But then over the course of the last 2 to 3 years, I mentioned earlier that tensions were high, patience was low, and my goodness, how we became so dichotomous. Yes, no, black, white, right? We lost the civility of the middle ground. And that was really difficult. We saw board meetings that, my goodness, the behavior of the adults was just so striking. We had that experience in my previous district. But it all came back to the same thing for us, right? And it's the same thing I italicized up here. How do we make sure, set the political language aside, how do we as a community feel that each one of our kids should experience school, regardless of gender, culture, skin color? I'd say zip code, but we're pretty limited on that here. Right? What about any of that? And here's the other question. What if one of those kids was yours? What would you expect of the district in public education? Would you expect them to be given every opportunity that every other student is? The answer is yes. Let's just agree to that, right? As we talk about some of the value components of that, that's a different level of discussion. That's where we all need to get in a room to say, okay, I gotta say I'm a little uncomfortable about this part of it. What can you tell me from the district's perspective you're doing about this? Or is there something that we can do to build our own knowledge around that? But the challenge is understanding, again, what our role is as a school district, and importantly, what our role is not. School districts, some by choice, let's be honest about that, right? Some by choice waded into the political foray, and it was like Oprah throwing flowers, right? They reveled in it. That was a community-based choice. Others of us tried to stay focused on the teaching and learning, how we can leverage all of this work to make sure that every one of our kids felt welcome, affirmed. In other words, regardless of all of those demographic pieces we talked about, you're here on purpose. And that purpose is to learn and learn well. So as we go into this, and I don't mean to be terribly vague on this, but the answer is pretty simple to me. With our DEI plan, for example, right? That's no longer just a standalone plan and something extra that we do. That's just becoming part of the fiber, because it comes down to a very simple premise. We are a public school. We welcome every kid and every family, and we do our very best to make sure that we are honoring the contract that we have with you, to give them every opportunity that their peer on the left, right, upstairs, downstairs has. And that's hard work, because we have situations in our buildings where the N-word is flown about, where there is hostility towards families of different cultures. These are not school issues, by which I mean the school sits within a community. These are now community issues that we have to deal with. I remember vividly, 2005, I stood in an auditorium very much like this. It was packed, and my opening statement was, this district does not have a drug problem. I had just suspended roughly 10 kids for 45 days because of the rampant drugs that were in our schools. My goodness, boom. I said, let me finish. This community has a drug problem. And what are we collectively going to do? Because we don't grow it, sell it, distribute it, use it as the leaders of the school district. It's coming in. How do we deal with that? The politics are coming in. How do we deal with that in such a way that we keep our focus on teaching and learning? We try to keep the politics out of it by having civil discussions, candid discussions about what we believe in as a collective community. and we move forward at the behest of our kids. For those students who are in gender identity situations, the state is very, very clear about that, and not just the state education department. This came from the Attorney General as well. We have a very specific directive for how we manage these things. We have not just one. We went through, just off the top of our head, we probably have 5 policies that speak directly to this within the district. And so our guidance counselors are really good about this, right? They know how to they know our families, they know these situations. And so on a case-by-case basis, we work through these things. And I've had the fortune in previous districts of working with really talented principals, guidance counselors. Same thing that we have here. They're going to help kids through that. They're going to help families through that. But you know who really provides a great level of help on this? It's the kids, right? For the most part, they take good care of each other. We're very fortunate in that regard as a community. Allie, where did you sit back down? There you are. I hope that helped. Right? And again, vague, if you're unsatisfied, let's talk more. Okay? Other questions?
Hi, welcome, Superintendent. Appreciate you taking the time tonight to speak with community. I'm not sure if this is an easier question, but you mentioned earlier that part of safety for kids is at least in part about making sure doors are locked and other aspects of school safety. Understanding you probably can't get into any kind of particulars, nor do we think we'd want you to, about building level measures and processes and things. Can you talk a little bit about what you and the district are doing to not be complacent and try to ensure that we're taking advantage of the best in state-of-the-art techniques and measures to keep our children safe in light of the ongoing violence in schools that we all witness unfortunately too often. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great and important question. Interestingly, we are really fortunate in the structure that we have, that the board and Dr. Brady put in place. Mike Nemeth, who is our coordinator of district security, retired state trooper, really bright. I mean, you talk about calm, cool, and collected. We are really fortunate to have him and how he organizes our security staff, and how he and the administrators and Terrence Hyder and Dr. Clamser really think around corners, if you will, about this. And so some concrete examples, no pun intended, the security vestibules that you see up at Springhurst, right? That was an important investment in securing that building. Contemplating doing more of that in the middle and high school. In my previous district, we had 6 buildings. We did it in every building, right? We want to know who's coming in and who's leaving the building. When you look at the sophistication of some of our technology that we have, and I'll be careful on the specifics here, let me just say this. If you're sitting in your car out front and you just had a spinach salad, we can send you a note and tell you that you have spinach in your teeth. Okay? We can see things here that are really helpful to us, and I'll stop there. I hope you'll all understand there are certain things that we can talk about. There are certain things that we won't put out from the blueprint status, if you will. This is where Commissioner's Regulation, if you're interested in this, 155.4 talks very specifically about what districts disclose and what they don't disclose. But what we're talking about at the end of the day that really provides the greatest level of security, it's behavior, right? Human behavior. And so how do we get our kids to understand that when there's a lockdown drill, you're building muscle memory. You don't walk down the hall chatting with your friend and have to have Mr. Mussolini intervene and say, practice like you mean it. I'm paraphrasing, Patrick. But let me tell you, he got my attention. I wasn't going to talk at that point, because we're trying to change that behavior. For the adults, how do we change that behavior in such that we build that situational awareness? And so part of this is that we've worked with, Justin Kamke is here from PD, working with Mike and Chief Rick, the fire department, 911 dispatch. We're doing what are called tabletop exercises, where we bring groups of first responders in our team and our counselors and our deans together, and we go through situations. And how are we going to react? We're training for that behavior, right? We've already done one. We're doing a second one on this. Looking through some of these situations that they come up. Okay, let's go through a threat assessment so that we know we can report to a parent, here's what's going on, here's when it happened, here's what we think the threat is, and here's the help that we need from you. So we are solidifying ourselves. We are working on changing behavior. We'll continue to provide training, not just in how to do lockdowns, right? We're starting to do something called therapeutic crisis intervention. The biggest part of that is de-escalation behavior, right? De-escalation language to help kids come off of that cliff, if you will, that they might be on, and very heightened, because one of the things that we know about school security, oftentimes, and this is why the behavioral piece is so important, oftentimes it comes from inside. So we've got to be ready for that as well. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you for your candor.
Ma'am.
Hi. Thank you again. I want to thank everyone for the information that you're sharing today. My question is on artificial intelligence. I wonder what role you see artificial intelligence in learning and in teaching. Are we using it now? How do you envision that we might use it? How do we use it to remove obstacles of learning, but also for new learning experiences? Thank you.
Yeah, so that I'm going to defer to one of the other pieces here, because I'd want to have the principals and Terrence Hyder and Amber Klebanoff, our instructional technology leader, chime in on that. One of the things that we know that the kids are really excited about is this chat GPT, right? And I don't know as though they're excited for it for all the right reasons, quite frankly. This is the next thing that districts are having to grapple with, right? When a student can make 3 minutes of statements and have a pretty accurate term paper written for them, right? That's probably going to result in a conversation with the policy committee before it's over with. But like with any technology, and again, you know, the AI is just the latest round of it for us. How do we leverage it to go to all of these points? You know, in my previous district, we had the virtual lab where, you know, kids would put the goggles on and we could take them on field trips and give them different experiences around that. That's, you know, early level AI. When I was at Skinny Atlas, we didn't use the goggles. We built a room. So you'd walk into this room, and this was fantastic, right? You'd step over the line, and all of a sudden, you're in the Louvre Museum. It was a little freaky, quite frankly. But all of the technology that worked together to give you that experience, you'd watch kids literally jump out of the room because it was so real. But these are the types of things that as we see the technology, and it really goes to the previous question, how do we evaluate whether that's going to be effective for us? It goes back to these questions. Will it enhance teaching and learning? Right? Will it give more kids more opportunities? Let's not fall prey to the next shiny object and think that it's great, because years and years of study, what does it tell us is the single most important thing next to a parent in a child's education? Anybody know the answer? The real life teacher standing in front of the classroom. And by the way, if they use explicit instruction, double bonus. If they teach children to read, now we're on to something. It has limitations. We have to be thoughtful about those. So that's not something that I can tell you, here's what we're doing, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a thoughtful policy-based approach on it, depending on what it does for our kids. Sir.
Yeah, thank you for listening today. I have 3 children, and they all went through Springhurst, and we were very enthusiastic about Springhurst. I think every parent is very happy with the way Springhurst is. The communication with the parents works very well. Any issue is immediately addressed. The middle school is not quite like that, and I think we have a communication problem that the assumption is that you hand the information to the children and they will somehow give it on to the parents. And that doesn't really work. And in your initial presentation, you described the role of a board and the role of the administration and the role of a teacher and the role of a student. And apparently the role of the parents was being the taxpayers. And that's something I would ask you to change to improve the information flow and the integration of the parents, especially in the middle school. And on a totally different topic, but you see here in the room the district invested a lot in theater and music and performing arts. And yeah, the district didn't invest quite as much in mathematics and science. And again, Springhurst, we very much liked Mr. Rosen there. And, but that stops after the Springhurst ends, and there is not any similar initiative for math and the sciences. So in December, there was the AMC 10, the American Math Competition, which leads ultimately to the selection of the International Mathematics Olympiad team of the US, and it wasn't offered here. I could get my child into Hastings, but here is no math club, and yeah, this is just not a priority here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for the questions. So a couple of things on that. So district number 5, I'm in district number 4 that had a separate middle school. And middle school is a challenge. I taught middle school, and I have the different slogans to prove that, because not everybody's a fan of teaching middle school and middle school children. Middle school is really difficult to find the balance, right? Particularly with the 6th grade, right? They're coming out of, Dr. Drake and I have had the conversation about the masterful work that she's done on building that culture up there. Who wouldn't want to hang out in Springhurst all day, right? It's just a joyful place to be. That's not by chance, right? That's by really thoughtful design. The work that's happening there in that culture and climate work, how do you transition that into the middle school, where in 3 very short years, we're sending kids to be much more independent into the high school? So there's always a challenge of balance there. But for the specific pieces around communication, I would ask for you to set up time with Mr. Mussolini and his team to talk about some of those specific concerns and bring suggestions on how that might improve. That's something that Patrick, Ann, and I have had conversations on already about how do we streamline some of that. How do we find, particularly post-pandemic, where the 6th graders and even the 7th graders missed out on a lot at Springhurst. And so how do we, within that limited time, still provide some of those great experiences that the kids might have missed? But I would encourage you to have those conversations. In terms of math and science, actually the same math program that's going into the various grades at Springhurst is actually coming into the middle grades as well. And we're doing it on a staggered basis, so it's not a school-wide initiative yet. But you'll see that over the next couple of years come in, and this is illustrative math, and Josh Rosen is in fact leading the work, K-8 on that. As administrators, we sat in on a couple of trainings with the illustrative math folks to build our understanding of what the program offers. And by the way, it's an exceptional program by every measure. And it will have our kids looking at math differently. Those of you who have gone to the math nights, for example, you see, it's different than how many of us learned. But there's so much research behind it relative to how it works on the cognitive structure of children and how children learn. You're going to see really good things coming out of that, which sets our kids up fantastically for some of the rigors of the high school math courses. In terms of science, we're bringing in new science standards and a new curriculum around that. Those things don't happen overnight, and the team has been working on that certainly from before my time. But in terms of how we then turn those things into like a math Olympiad and participation in that, I'm more than happy to have that conversation with the team to see if that's something that we could certainly involve our students in. I hope that helps.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. And you?
Thank you for doing this. You had mentioned before psychology, which I never even thought about at the high school level, and you talked about how whether or not there would be students that would be interested or enough students interested in it. I love the idea of it being mandatory, especially in a society where we have so many children with ADHD and who are just differently abled, and wouldn't it be great for them to be able to learn a little bit more about themselves? It's just a suggestion.
The woman sitting behind you might hug you on the way out, by the way. We have a psychology teacher sitting over here. Dr. Foligno can certainly have a more specific conversation with you around that. But one of the things that's great about psychology, and Penny and I, Penny Sullivan-Nunish, one of our board members, we've had the conversation around, psychology and learning about how the mind functions is great. Leveraging that in terms of advantaging kids on how they learn, right, that's where the money is, if you will. How many of us went through high school, college, various trainings with the highlighter, right? My college roommate, it was the exceptional word that wasn't highlighted. For whatever reason, he highlighted everything, right? He rewrote his notes. He did all these things, just hours and hours. It's like, is any of that actually going in? Now, this was in early 1990. What do we know now about how the brain works relative to highlighting, for example? It's not effective. It's just not effective. We know a whole lot more. If you're really interested in getting into what works, take a look at a professor from University of Virginia. His name is Dan Willingham. Just Google him, Dan Willingham study skills, right? It will depress you for what maybe if you knew this way back when, you could have been so much more efficient in your work and maybe a better student. But it's certainly something that we can pass on to our kids. So the advantages that a course like psychology can offer are significant. Here's the challenge. Every time you offer a new course in a high school the size of ours, there's the risk of having to displace another one. You get to a point where you're saturated. The master schedule can no longer tolerate it. And when I say master schedule, Dr. Foligno may in fact be flinching in the back. That is the high school principal's really biggest challenge every year, is balancing that high school schedule. And so this goes to the point that I made earlier. We have to make choices about the courses that we offered. Now, the kids brought this to Dr. Foligno. John, if I recall correctly, this came out of that meeting. Fantastic. Let's see if we can make it work. And again, for a class like that, we're not talking about the study of ancient basket making. Right? We're talking about something that can really advantage our students in terms of learning how they learn, for example. Okay, so thank you for that question. Hello there.
Hi. Thanks for doing this, and I'm always fascinated in initial observations, and especially coming out of the times that we've just faced. So I guess, what are your initial observations of how we are faring in re-identifying almost and minding the gaps that we were addressing prior to the pandemic? Things like, the achievement gap, the digital divide gap, learning and social gaps. The organization that I have the privilege of running, that's what we focus on all the time. So to try to hear the perspective of how we're emerging and capturing, some of these needs-based issues. For example, we just went through 2 years of free lunch for everyone.
No.
So how do you then, in a system that pretty much tries to identify how to address needs based on qualification or for free and reduced lunch, how are we faring, and what is your opinion, again, because these are initial observations of what some of these new benchmarks are going to be, so that we can work to bring things together in the way that we need to bring things together?
Yeah, it's such an important question. Let me start with the free and reduced lunch piece. At the last board meeting, Mrs. Lucasey queried the board as to whether they would be willing to pass a resolution to advocate for free and reduced lunch for all kids. We saw so many advantages to that across districts. The demographics, the SES didn't matter, right? Gone was the food worry of children. Right? All of a sudden, everybody can eat a good breakfast and have a good lunch and not have to have that paranoia that, wait a minute, if that machine beeps in a different way, do my friends know that I'm getting free lunch? Those are very real things for kids and families to be worried about. And what was it, maybe 3 weeks ago in one of the updates, I sent a connection to Mrs. Barron, where are you? What's the group that's advocating the Lower Hudson Educational Council? They're putting together the advocacy for this, and I sent that out and asked folks to participate in that. So that's something that we are very interested in moving forward, and we are hardly alone in that because we all saw those advantages. Other pieces that we're seeing, and again, hardly unique to Dobbs Ferry, the change in behavior, right? That is really something that is quite marked for us, particularly in younger children, which is not a surprise, right? In those critical years of learning how to, quote unquote, do school, if you will, part of which is learning how to socialize within school, where, you know, maybe you were an individual or you had a few siblings or some neighborhood friends that you were maybe running with during the pandemic. Now all of a sudden you're in with 20 of them, and then you're in gym class with more than that, and you're in lunch with even more than that. We're spending a lot of time addressing those different behaviors, and this is where I talked about the therapeutic crisis intervention training, giving teachers the tools to manage these changes in behaviors, which again, in many cases are quite stark in contrast to what we were dealing with pre-pandemic. So there's the behavior piece. Another piece that we started looking at this week was attendance data, right? My goodness, some of the things that we are seeing, and we're not done digging on this yet, but when you look at some of the kids who are hitting those measures of what's called chronic absenteeism, and the board has very thoughtfully laid out a policy in which the numbers are shown in there about when parents will be notified. Dr. Felino and I had an exchange today where he's talking about that, look, here's what we're doing from an intervention perspective on the kids who they haven't even tipped those scales in some cases. We're small enough where we know our kids. We know who's not here. And the outreach and the work that, you know, Assistant Principal GM is doing around this, leading that team on Dr. Felino's behalf, this is really good stuff. And this is kind of the new world that we're in having to deal with these things. Chronic absenteeism has always been some problem. You've had really good attendance here historically, but this is a challenge, and it's a challenge in all of our schools, quite frankly. And so now we start digging down to what we call the subpopulations, right? Students with disabilities, students who are economically disadvantaged, Hispanic students. Okay? These are all state categories. We're seeing some flags there that are really worrisome, and so we're probably going to be engaging you on some of that in terms of how we can connect with families more effectively, that if we're going to do all of the things that we talked about, it's important that the children are here, right? So the attendance piece is significant. Looking at some of the curricular and the learning gaps, you know, what is happening that really crosses over the behavior and the academic piece. The positive behavior work that Mr. Mussolini and the middle school are doing. My goodness, if you want to have fun, come and watch one of the celebrations. Patrick, how often do you have those? Once a month, to come in and watch the staff and all the kids coming together around this. Oh my goodness. Like I said, it's a version of being up at Springhurst. It is just delightful to see that. That was built really intentionally to give the kids that feeling that we're back in school, we're doing this work together, to give them incentives to get away from maybe some of those challenging behaviors. And so then you look at the work that Dr. Drake is leading in her building around literacy and around some of the social emotional supports that our kids need. And we had our goal team meeting last week around this. You know, and you can't help but just sit there and smile because of the work that's going on behalf of kids and families. I go back to the idea that they're all really tired because of this level of work that we're doing, because we're seeing some of those gaps and identifying them, and then asking the question, is there a better way to get to more of our kids for better outcomes? So we are, in fact, seeing this. All of you are much more aware than I am that from, you know, the access to learning perspective, the district was literally light years ahead of so many districts in terms of the connectivity. You had access to the Chromebook, you had access, so many of our families had access to that. So that mechanical piece, you all were really well prepared for that. There were so many districts that were trying to catch up on that. And so that piece was very good, and we learned a lot about how we might leverage that approach going forward. But really, it's those key areas that I talked about, making sure that every kid is well fed and not hungry. That's certainly a priority, that they are here in attendance, that when they are here, knowing that we have some of those subpopulations who are struggling, we're making the best curriculum and instruction plans that may in fact be different than what we did prior to the pandemic, but we have good evidence that they're going to be better than what we were doing before. I hope that helps for now. I'm well, thank you. And you? Good. Thanks for being here.
Yes, thanks for sharing your early observations and your strategic vision for the district. I appreciate it. I had a three-part question specifically about the middle school and high school. And that is, one, are there any ideas that are percolating around enrichment or accelerated learning? The second question would be, if so, what are some of these ideas, if you could share them with us, that you're hearing or discussing with your board and peers? And then the third question is, what would be an appropriate forum or means for parents to provide input into those specific areas?
Yeah, great question. It's timely as well. Mr. Mussolini, Dr. Stinchcomb, and I, and a few of us have been having conversations, particularly around the middle school, and looking at opportunities for that enrichment, but again, enrichment that really hits as many kids as possible. And we talked about a plan that we put in place when I was in Skinny Atlas, which, for argument's sake, is very, very similar to Dobbs Ferry in a lot of different ways. And so we created online courses, and to do an online course in New York State, there's a section of commissioner's regulations that is really, really specific. It's not just go to whomever will offer it. There are, I can tell you the regulation, but I won't bore you with that, but there's a number of steps that have to be matched. So if our own staff can't offer it, is there a neighboring school that we can partner with? Can we partner with BOCES, and it has to meet all these criteria? So we checked all those boxes. And we met with parents. We ran it as a 15-student pilot to start with, and we offered MIT's Scratch, the coding course, right? BOCES was very nervous. They're like, you're going to bring middle school kids in? This is a high school course? Like, look, we were very careful in the kids that we selected. They had to be all in. The parents had to be all in to try this, right? Instead of, and we had made a change to the master schedule that we didn't see that there was going to be this burst of study halls. Look, as a parent, my kid would have loved study halls all day. As a parent, not a fan, right? I want them doing something rigorous. So we started this pilot. Two things came out of it. We leveraged the transfer authority that the high school principal has to give kids high school credit for those courses because they were, in fact, high school classes. The second thing that came out of that is that BOCES called us and said, we wish the high school kids did as well as your middle school kids did. So these were kids, in addition to accelerated science and math that they can take as a matter of course anyways, there were kids that were going into high school with 4 and 5 credits. And so that was all by design so that their senior year was freed up to take college courses. We had a lot of AP courses in that district, internships, externships, because one of the things that we really focused on, we need to give our kids opportunities, not just to figure out what they want to do, right? That's very aspirational as adults, but we need to give them opportunities to figure out what they don't want to do, right? And so we found a way that that's not a high school thing. That starts in the middle school. So Patrick and I have been having those conversations about how we can think a little bit differently around this. We'll get back to you on our thinking on that, but thank you for the question. Let's do a couple more questions. Again, I like to start on time. I like to end on time. Happy to stay after these next 2 questions.
Hi, thank you so much for bringing this together. It's much appreciated, and hope there's many more. My question is around the strategic plan that you mentioned before, and what I'm hearing and understanding, it's ending this year, 5-year span. And so I'd like to just hear a little bit more about what that planning looks like for the next 5 years right now, and then how the community members and parents are going to get involved or can get involved in that process.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So when our team was assembled and the board and I came together, we looked at the existing plan, which started in 2018. Again, community and school-based groups got together around this. And we started making adjustments to it. And then as we had the conversation, a number of conversations with the board, is this the direction that we want to go? Do we want to start changing the existing plan, or do we want to leverage the goals that we've established, give us more time to kind of get our feet on the ground, if you will, and use that as the bridge to the next plan? And so I don't think there's any, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't think we're deterred at all from using a very similar process to what the district has used in the past, where this is a school and community-based group that looks at the old plan. How did we do on that? Are there things that we should carry over and continue? Let's look at the goals and how they bridge, and what will that mean in terms of the next set of strategies. And a lot of this work is already going on. For example, Dr. Clamser and his team, they're working on building a 5-year long-range financial plan. Dennis Brazil, again with Dr. Clamser, they're doing a long-range facilities plan, right? So when I talk about systems, the systems are generating plans that are going to feed very nicely into that next round of strategic planning. That is very much on our radar, but we used this year's goals to buy us a little time to generate some more familiarity and, again, to build knowledge. Does that help? We are certainly happy to talk more, though.
Hi.
Hi there.
Thank you so much for your time tonight. I just wrote a few notes so that I stay on task with what I was trying to say. So earlier this evening, you talked about the DEI work and how it's being integrated or kind of woven into everything that happens with the school and with the district. But I guess I wanted to just ask a few questions about the work in general. So a lot of students and parents and community members have been part of the task forces that took place in the past prior to your arrival. And so a few questions about where is that work, where are the community members and the students and parents in terms of the task force. You say it's integrated, but where is that work? I think it's important to just note that all of this work began with the Black at movement. And then Black at Dobbs and the community members and the students and the alums from our community and the movement and their experiences that kind of sparked the task force. And so I think it's important to remember that, because a lot of those experiences that sparked the movement and sparked the task force have not really been resolved. Right, so those experiences, and I think that those are still very much alive today from our students who are still in this school district. So I think if we think that those have just been resolved, it's important to remember and reread those things, because they're not resolved and they're not fixed. I think one of the important things as we think about the DEI work that was very striking to me as a community member, as a parent of 3 children in this community, one is in college, one's a first year who is in college who just left, is that there has been no statement to our community from you at all about the Tyree Nichols incident or any conversation, as far as I'm aware, to our students as an appropriate conversation about what has gone on. Our children at different levels are aware of what has gone on, and so I'm just wondering what the thought is around that. I think it's an important conversation to be had. We are a small community. The school is our community in many ways. The responsibility does fall on us as parents. I don't expect the school to replace what we do as parents, but I do think we should be in partnership with one another, and not having any involvement or any conversation from the school, I do think is kind of a glaring absence. So that is something I thought we should be talking a little bit about. And I do also want to note that there are still many microaggressions that are taking place, and macroaggressions, quite honestly, in our school every single day, at every single school in our school district. And there's no clear mechanism for reporting that from a student standpoint or from a parent standpoint. And I think that causes a lot of harm to our students, and it causes harm to their learning and to their education. Because if you don't feel safe, to your point, it's not just about safe in the building, right? It's safe about learning. And if you don't feel safe to be able to learn in the classroom, that you're not going to be able to advance. Yeah. And so if there's no clear mechanism to be able to report the micro or macroaggressions that are happening every single day from your peers or from your teachers, that's a problem. And that was some of the work that was happening in the task force. And so if that's just being dropped or not continue to be worked on and communicated, that's a clear problem and causing harm to our students. And so I just think that's something we need to work on, and that needs to be a priority for all of us and for all of our children. So I hope that's something we can focus on.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for the question. So a couple of things. If you look at the district goals, for example, it's very clear in there that one of them is dedicated to continuing the DEI plan. The difference between now and then is that that was construction work, right? And so there was a lot of mechanical pieces moving in that, pulling things together, having those meetings. The board approved the plan, the board adopted the policy, we have the training going on, and each building is now charged as a result of that plan with integrating this work. So none of that is presumed to be fixed, right? That would be terribly naive on our part. And by the way, we have disciplinary issues every day which back up what you're saying. And so while it's no longer a headline in terms of what we're doing, that's because we're doing the work, right? And so when we had our team meeting around that goal, and the building principals were reporting out, and Dr. Stinchcomb, who leads this work, when they were reporting out the work that's being done, everything from curriculum unit analysis to the type of, Dr. Drake, for example, sending out a survey, making sure that the staff feels included. All of that is part and parcel. We don't headline that because that's just the work, and that's what I was suggesting when this is just part of what we do now. Because one of the real dangers in leaving the DEI plan kind of sitting out there on its own is that when time comes to a crunch, is there something that we cannot do? No. That is part and parcel of our strategic plan and our goals. Even at the outset of our goals document, you'll see this integrates all of that work. And so if you're curious about what's happening at each of the individual buildings, I would encourage you to have a conversation with the principal. I suspect you'll be pleased on that. The task force piece, that is something that is within the board's policy. And so this spring, again, as we're aggregating the work that's going on and how we are progressing towards that goal, that will be the focus of a task force meeting. Here's where we are, here's how we're doing, what comes next. One of the things that we'll be doing, for example, is that some of the dates on the DEI plan were admittedly aspirational coming out of the gate. We wanted to get there, and again, within competition with so many other things, we just weren't. We're not saying that, no, we're going to stop that. We're just going to make those timelines a little more realistic, which goes to your point that this work is ongoing. This isn't something that 3 years from now we're going to say, hey, fantastic, congratulations, we're done. That's like saying we're done teaching reading, right? This is the work. And so moving that forward, integrating it with our training, integrating it with how we hire people is all part and parcel of what we do now. And so if we can do a better job communicating that, I'd be happy to have those conversations. A couple other points that you made. The issue with Tyree, it's interesting because we as Rivertown superintendents had the conversation that, look, is this something, and one of our colleagues put something out about that because some of his staff members asked him for direction on it. This is something that with any of these issues, I just have a lot of faith in our teachers and in our administrators that you're going to address this where it's appropriate, and when students have challenges with it, we're going to provide the counseling staff to give them that support. Now, I see you nodding your head. If that's not happening, I'm happy to have that conversation. But there are certain things, and I've been criticized in a previous instance that we have, from not going out and being a voice around these things. And so that's part of my knowledge building. What is the expectation of the majority of the community around these things? What do you expect the school role is when there is a crisis in society, when we have our charge of the things that we have to do every day? It's that balancing act. Do we keep moving? Do we integrate that? Do we trust the community to have those conversations and move that forward? And there's tension there because it's time, right? And how do we address this, and how do we not exacerbate a crisis? How do we instead make sure that our kids feel safe without necessarily having to address a specific issue like that? But again, that's something we talk about getting better. As I build my knowledge, we'll continue to have those conversations, and I'm happy to do that. Let's see. The reporting requirements. This all really falls in with the Dignity Act, right? If kids feel that there's harassment, intimidation, bullying, anything like that, every building has what's called a DASA coordinator, Dignity for All Students Act, has a coordinator. We have whole processes spelled out in policy. Everything's right on the front page of our website. If kids aren't comfortable or parents aren't comfortable going that route, please have a conversation with someone in the district that you trust. My preference is that it's with a building administrator, or if it's happening in a classroom, start at the closest area to the issue and have the conversation with the adults. They know by policy there's a reporting requirement for that. We just finished up an investigation this afternoon, for example, on a situation like this. So not only do we have mechanisms, again, all of our staff is well aware of the processes. If you're not sure, just call us and ask. We're happy to address this. And I think, does that cover most of what? Yeah, I think I got most of your points. Right? Thank you so much, again, for taking the time to come out, again, spending the time that you did. Any of you who have questions, either you weren't comfortable asking or you just have something that's a little closer to home, please, I welcome you to stay after and have that conversation. Thank you all very much, and safe home.